title slide. Excuse me for having these initial problems, but I think most of you needed a little break, so I hope it will be a benefit after all. If you go to the next slide, please. Since this was supposed to be very brief, only 10 minutes, I have two main messages to convey. The first is a more general reflection on marine spatial planning. If that is conceived of only as a tool for allocating ocean space, we run the risk of it being too narrow for protecting the ecosystems. And I will reflect particularly on the relationship between ecosystem-based management and marine spatial planning. Then I was asked to say a few words about Norway as a case. And as regards Norway, in the oceans, ecosystem-based management is now institutionalized. Since 2002, this has become routine. However, we do not have a system for cross-sectoral marine spatial planning in the oceans. When we move into the coastal zone, it's different. There we have a rather strong system for cross-sectoral marine spatial planning, which is an extension of the land-based planning system. And that has traditions going back at least to 1965. However, ecosystem-based management is rather weak in the coastal zone in Norway. So these are my two main messages that I want to say a few more words about. Can you please change? First, in trying to understand what is ecosystem-based management, do you see the content of what seems to be the black bubbles only in my screen? Or are they black for the rest of you as well? Because the idea here is that the lower part here, the photos here, indicate different sections of an ecosystem. And what you have here on the top are different industrial sectors that have an impact on the ecosystem. So maybe the most fundamental when it comes to ecosystem-based management is that it is the whole ecosystem which is the management object. It's not a part of it like it is in, for instance, in fisheries. And what is important is that you address the impacts from all the different industrial sectors upon the whole ecosystem, taking the cumulative impacts into account, because that is the starting point for allocating responsibility for management measures to mitigate against undesired impacts. So this is a very broad way and simple way of trying to explain what is ecosystem-based management. If you use the page down, there are two comments underneath. Ecosystem-based management is a holistic framework around or above sectoral management. It's not a substitute. So for instance, in Norway, we have one policy layer, if you like, which is ecosystem-based management, and that is being implemented. It is a framework around all the different sectoral management systems that we have. Maybe more importantly is that this is multidisciplinary. It's multi-sectoral, and very often, or usually, it is also multi-level in its governance, meaning that it's very challenging. And that is also probably one of the reasons why ecosystem-based management has run into problems. You go to the next slides here. Ecosystem-based management was, I will almost say, the integrative approach to ocean management around year 2000. CBD, Convention on Biodiversity, had supported it enthusiastically in the 1990s. And at the Rio+10 summit in Johannesburg, it was recommended to be applied in all ocean areas around the world. And the FAO also had its sectoral approach to fisheries, ecosystem-based approach to fisheries. Today, there is less talk about ecosystem-based ocean management. CBD seems to have abandoned it more or less. They mostly now talk about marine protected areas. And you have a strong drive for blue growth, and marine spatial planning seems to be taking over as the kind of dominant tool for ocean management. So ecosystem-based ocean management seems to be driven on a sidetrack. Personally, I have studied it in Canada. Canada was reported to be a front runner in the 1990s and early 2000s, but they have abandoned it. So has Australia. The US never managed to make it fly at the federal level, at least. So Norway is quite exceptional by having it institutionalized, and also the EU coastal states are important in this context because they implement EU framework directive. The idea with this is to make a conceptual hierarchy of different approaches. And if you look at integrated ocean management as a way of integrating social, economic, and environmental issues, like the typical way to view sustainable development, you can say that ecosystem-based ocean management is a way of making, first of all, the environmental pillar of integrated ocean management operational. And then you can have, for instance, blue growth initiatives, like we find in so many countries these days. We just heard about South Africa. We have in Norway, in the EU countries, and so forth, which could be kind of realizing an economic pillar. Then for implementing ecosystem-based ocean management, you have a lot of different measures you can apply. Some of them are spatial, and for those, marine spatial planning can be important. But there are several others that are non-spatial. For instance, setting emission standards, setting fishing quotas, and so forth. So in order to have the breadth here, you must have both marine spatial planning and those other policy instruments in place. And within marine spatial planning, of course, you have a lot of different areas you can set aside. But now, particularly because of the political drive from the Convention on Biodiversity to set aside 10% of ocean space as the marine protected areas, this seems to dominate very strong at the moment, which is a risk. If you read what many social scientists report, I was in South Africa this year in March and read characteristics from South African social scientists about an approach they call to fence and fine. So small-scale fishers are basically being driven out, and you have huge problems with illegal fishing in the protected areas. The problem here with moving down the ladder is that the further down the ladder you move, it means that you make a simplification. And I'm very much concerned about the need for the ecosystem-based ocean management. Marine spatial planning can function excellent within an ecosystem-based ocean management framework, but alone there is a risk that it only becomes an instrument for making ocean space available, for instance, for aquaculture farms like in Norway, or ocean windmills, as we just heard examples from Germany, or whatever it might be, or new industries that drive marine spatial planning. Change, please. Then to Norway as an example. Norway has divided its ocean space into three management areas: the Barents Sea, the Norwegian Sea, and the North Sea and the Skagerrak. And their management plans have been made, particularly for the Barents Sea, where it started in 2002, and the first plan was presented in 2006. So this has now become routine, more or less, for our national government. Some characteristics of this system is that this is driven by political needs. There was a complete political stalemate in the early 2000s, about the expansion northwards of the oil and gas industry in Norway, which is the most important when it comes to revenue and export income. There is absolutely no statutory basis for these plans. And that is interesting because there are many recommendations that we need to have a legal basis for these type of plans. In Norway, they function without. But the sectorial management that will implement these plans, they are legally based. So the plans are driven top down from the government across all sectors. So all relevant ocean sectors are, so to say, commanded into an organizational structure where they collaborate on gathering data, on monitoring, on making strategic environmental assessments, and coming up with recommendations for plans, which they deliver to the central government. So there is a very strong knowledge component here, and several of my Norwegian colleagues have written with that perspective. But personally, I am in fact the first one who have dived more into the political side of this, and the way that disagreements have been solved are extremely important. Remember the political needs that drive this. This means that political disagreements have been lifted up to the absolute highest level where the cabinet solve conflicts. So, for instance, our Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg himself, way back in 2006, was instrumental in negotiating package deals about the Barents Sea for the first plan that was made. That is probably also one of the reasons why implementation has been successful. That has been the focus of my research, in which I have applied implementation theory, which I've hardly seen references to in ocean literature. When it comes to marine spatial planning, this system with the knowledge component has created a very important knowledge base for marine spatial planning. But there is no cross-sectorial system for such in place. The plans basically have provided a framework for the petroleum sector as such, but apart from that, linkages to other ocean sectors and their use of ocean space is weak. You go to the next slide. These are just the white papers that have been sent from the government to the parliament from the three first versions of the Barents Sea Management Plan. Go to the next, please. In the coastal zone, it's very different. We have a fragmented system here, where ecosystem-based management is try to do that by to implement EU's water framework directive. However, and it's the counties that are responsible for the plans, and they collaborate through water body boards. However, it's the freshwater that gets most of the attention. So when we come out in the fjords, and not least if you see the baseline and baseline plus 1 nautical miles, which is where this planning, the area in which this planning should take place. These are huge areas into the ocean, and it seems that ocean space gets much less attention in these plans than the freshwater areas. When it comes to marine spatial planning, we have coastal zone plans. And as I've already said, they build on the Plan and Building Act, which was extended into the sea in the mid-1980s, so there is a long tradition. The reason basically was to find new areas for the growing aquaculture industry. So that has driven very much of Norwegian experience in coastal zone planning. Here the municipalities have the main role, and it seems that there is a very weak linkage to the water management plans, meaning that here you run the risk of having a type of activity which I warned against in the beginning, as a way of allocating ocean space without having it nested into a system of ecological management, most beneficial ecosystem-based management. So I think that's what was my major messages. Thank you for the opportunity to present.